But in the inside, there's just a sad little boy who didn't get love that they needed. So now they're trying to control love and control others.
Why should I sit in my house wondering about if he's at Walmart or not, or wondering if he's at this, restaurant or not? I'm going to the restaurant, and if he's there, I don't care.
I am the founder and a clinical director of Psychotherapy for Young Women, which is an empowering private practice based in New York City. And we specialize in helping young women, young adults, and couples navigating anxiety, trauma, relationship issues, and transitioning like big life changes. That's kind of what we do. We're a team of 5 therapists, and yeah, I'm very excited to be here sharing some of my thoughts and knowledge on the topic of narcissistic abuse.
Awesome. Yes. And we're so glad to have you. So you primarily focus your practice on young women. Is that like women under 40, 30?
Yeah, I love the question. It's very subjective. Women between 20, 35 years old is usually our type of client that reaches out the most. And definitely the young adulthood pressures have to do with finding your identity, your sense of self, breaking free from kind of the stereotypical expectations of you as an adult. It's a big transitional period, and you can be going through that at 20 or at 35 or at even at 40.
Do you think there are added pressures, or maybe not added, but different pressures placed on this group of people than there was even on the same age bracket 2 generations ago?
Oh, absolutely. We're constantly reviewing and discussing in therapy sessions a lot of forms of social oppression and discrimination, stereotypes. Definitely gender roles have shifted so much. And there's a lot of guilt and shame about wanting to break free from those. And I think that causes a lot of anxiety. So I'm a woman and I'm expected to want to be a mom, for example, at 30, and I'm not feeling kind of that craving yet. So that generates anxiety. What do I do with it? So the therapy that we are trained into, usually it's like the one designed like over 80 years old, like 2 generations or more ago. So we definitely believe in updating therapy so it actually applies to the new generation.
You're right. I know that a lot of the practices are outdated, and not only that, they're kind of working on outdated models of how humans and human minds work a lot of times.
Exactly. Yeah.
With this new generation, or these newer generations, like what you're saying, maybe adulthood is in like 20 to 35, and females in particular, what do you see as some of their biggest challenges as it relates to maybe sort of toxic personalities and or narcissism? Do you see anything particularly in that realm affecting this group of people?
Yes, definitely. So what you mean by toxic, what do you mean exactly?
Yeah, that's a good question, right? So I was just listening yesterday. I was just listening to a video by Dr. Ramani, and you're right. That is very subjective. Like, who I find to be toxic, you might not. So I know that's subjective. So let's move that out of. Thank you for clarifying that. I love that pushback. I love it. Yeah. What are you talking about, Echo? I love it. So let's move that away, because that is very subjective. But there are specific narcissistic traits. Like maybe they don't have narcissistic personality disorder, but they have this set of traits that are typically what we lump together and call narcissism.
Yeah.
Do you see people with these sort of traits impacting your clients?
So this is a very good question, because at what time in the relationship they're feeling the impact of these toxic traits that you're describing. Sometimes we see clients that are entering these relationships and they're very confused, and they're coming in trying to understand what's going on. Sadly, most of these clients are confused, and they blame themselves for the confusion. We also see clients that are in the other end of the spectrum, recovering after they were able finally to end a relationship with a narcissist. So obviously the treatment approach changes if you're, in the very early on stages of either entering a narcissist relationship or a relationship with a narcissist or someone with narcissistic traits, or someone who is ending a relationship. But I see it very often, sadly.
That was another thing Dr. Ramani was mentioning, and I've read it elsewhere, is that sort of it's on the rise. And one of the reasons she said, is a sort of sidetrack, which I thought was interesting. She said, if you read a book on how to be a successful male in the tech industry and narcissistic traits, it would probably be the same book. I'm not quoting her verbatim, but that very often people with these narcissistic traits are rewarded and oftentimes put into leadership positions and are very successful in some ways. Well, not successful in others, obviously. So she feels that it's on the rise. But I'm interested in hearing, one, if you think it's on the rise, and then sort of say piggybacking off that, why do you think that's the case?
Yes, I feel like, yes, in my practice, I see it's on the rise. However, this is one of those things about human behavior and human interaction that I believe it has been there for a long time. It's just now that we are becoming aware of it, we're talking about it, there's less shame about it. Similarly to sexual abuse, where we're like, wow, yes, is it really that it's on the rise and there are more cases, or is that now that we're becoming aware and it's been happening for a long time now? So I think it qualifies. It's similar to the sexual abuse. There's more awareness. There's less shame and guilt to bring it up and talk about it. And the other reason why I believe this, and I'm thinking of one of my idols, Esther Perel. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist. Yes, she's very popular. And I was very lucky to see her at this workshop in New York. And she was talking about, she talked about many amazing things, but in regards to this topic, how if boys were touched and held with love by their parents more often and were allowed to have feelings and experience feelings and develop emotional skills as boys, there would be less issues with consent and sexual abuse. And I think that qualifies or also applies to narcissistic abuse, because you see on the shell on the outside this abuser, but in the inside there's just a sad little boy who didn't get love that they needed. So now they're trying to control love and control others and control lovability in a way that it's unhealthy. So that makes me think of that.
And you bring up a really good point. It is often the case that it's just now we're naming it and calling it out, whereas before we weren't. So it's not actually that it's on the rise. It's just we now have a name for it and we're more comfortable discussing it.
Right.
You also said that you kind of see it on two ends of the spectrum whenever one of your clients is getting into the relationship and they're so confused. And I remember being so confused too whenever I was getting into it. I was confused the whole time, I think. And then at the tail end, whenever they're getting out of it, and then there's different emotions there. Right. Could you speak just a little bit, first of all, to what patterns you see at the beginning, and then we'll move on to the patterns you see at the end?
Typical patterns in the beginning, it's the love bombing. It's a very classical one. Pretty much the narcissist is luring the victim. Let's call it that way, because we're talking about abuse. So one of my clients actually defines it as she felt like a shiny object. Like he wanted to show her around and was very much saying, you're amazing, you're incredible, you're the most amazing woman I've ever met. I want to have kids with you. I'm so impressed by you. And that you see that very early on. It's just the classic first early stages of narcissistic abuse, just trying to lure their victim in, gain their trust. And if there is history of childhood trauma, and low self-esteem, that love bombing can be very tempting, can be very, wow, that's amazing. I really enjoy this love and this attention I'm receiving. My inner child, it's actually feeling warmth and finally, this care and attention that I didn't have maybe growing up. And when they're starting to get ready to, okay, there's something here that's off, there's more manipulation, gaslighting, emotional invalidation, my clients feeling questioning their own reality. There's a lot of cognitive dissonance. And what I mean by that is these conflicting thoughts of, they are so good to me. Like, they brought me to see their parents and they got me all these presents. And it was the first time that they bring someone to Thanksgiving or something like that. But then the next day I had to sleep with the door closed and locked because I was afraid of his verbal abuse. So yeah, more abandonment and devaluation at the end of the relationship.
Yeah, that is so reminiscent of my experience. I even wrote a blog, and I've talked about it a lot, on how I called it, and I'm not the first one to call it this, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde person. I couldn't reconcile these two very different people in my head. And finally a therapist had to lay it straight to me and say, they're one person, and it's the bad one. That's who the one person is that you're dealing with. They're not two separate people. But you can't make sense of it because you're getting thrown with two sets of facts,
right,
or observations that you're experiencing with your own five senses, that they can't both be true. And so you're trying to figure out how are all these good qualities and all these bad qualities going together? And it's finally, you have to, so at least in my case, I had to realize that the good qualities are a mask that he's putting on to fool you. That isn't who he is. These bad qualities are who he is. And that kind of cleared up my cognitive dissonance. So the confusion is 100%, and the sense of betrayal and abandonment.
Yes.
Completely what I felt. And I felt a lot of shame, tons of shame. In hindsight, looking back, I'm not sure why I felt that, but at the time, I felt tons of shame.
Yeah, the shame is and the guilt are classic feelings that these type of relationships will make you feel, so because
yes,
narcissists, how can I put this into words? They are, for the most part, very high functioning. So it's not your typical abuser, crazy talking nonsense that you can say, okay, this person is crazy, clearly. I'm not going to deal with this person and I'm going to walk away. They are, for the most part, very intelligent, very charismatic. They're very charming, and they choose women who also have similar qualities. The shiny object qualities. Again, they're professionals. They are beautiful. They want to kind of like suck that self-worth into their own self-worth and feed off that. So when you consider yourself as a woman, in this case, again, we're talking about heterosexual relationships, I am a professional, I am beautiful, I am strong, I've done things that I feel very proud of myself, I achieved a lot of goals. That can create a lot of shame when you put that in contrast with, wow, but I've been fooled by someone who's been tricking me. And the guilt and the shame is definitely something we work on in therapy. Is one of the main kind of healing and recovery practices. To acknowledge the reality of the abuse, naming it abuse. It's very important. Normalizing the feelings of shame and guilt, which are feelings across the spectrum of abuse. Mm-hmm. So if we're talking about abuse, narcissistic abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, social political abuse, there's a lot of shame always comes along with abuse. So we cannot treat abuse without treating shame, is what I'm trying to say.
That's interesting. And like I said, now that I'm almost 2 years removed from this relationship and have been through tons and tons of therapy, I can't even remember, I can't make sense in my head why I felt ashamed, except that I was kind of duped, right? But it's like my behaviors were not the shameful ones, his were, but yet I internalized all that shame and that guilt. Now, 2 years out that I've processed all that, I don't feel that anymore at all. But I did at the beginning. And so I do feel that these various types of therapy are key for survivors. So maybe we could transition now into talking about some of the therapies that in general you offer and how you see them benefiting survivors of any sort of abuse, but narcissistic abuse more specifically.
When you are, in the fantasy land that the narcissist is trying to paint for you, you don't feel like you need help. You're like, this is normal. He's good. He just had a bad day. You start to kind of intellectualize those moments. So when survivors seek help the most are when they're starting to become aware of there's something off with this. And if they're in the early stages of realizing that, then my approach and my recommendation is to focus on safety. That's always the number one. The emotional clarity. What does this mean? What is the narcissistic abuse cycle? What is gaslighting? What is cognitive dissonance? What is real and what's not? And breaking the trauma bond, which is the hardest, I feel like, part of therapeutic work, especially so early on, because even though intellectually that they're hurting you and there's something very wrong with their behavior, you still feel very attached. There is this chemical addiction in your brain that keeps you kind of trapped in that bond and in that loop. Then prioritizing safety and boundaries, that's very important, because narcissists can become violent, not just verbally, but also physically. They have very low tolerance to frustration, and that can be very dangerous. So they have to stay in touch with the narcissist, let's say, for co-parenting reasons. Yes. How can we reduce the harm? There's this term called gray rocking, which is pretty much emotionally disengaging, trying to actually make yourself very boring in a sense when you talk to them. Yes. Also helping them resist the temptation to return and kind of like, what are we going to do when they try to suck you back in with apologies, fake remorse, guilt trips, yes. Find support system that is, yes, therapy, but also friends, family members that can support you and hold you accountable, maybe groups. I think this podcast, it's a great example of that. I can go on, right, with the interventions and what to do with it, but as a summary, if this is early on in the stages of leaving, it definitely requires more attention, more interventions. We're focused more on safety and tools, emotional clarity, and breaking the trauma bond. So how can we help this client stay out of the bond and resist the temptation to go back in? So it's all about safety and protection and anchoring them. And when clients are, further along in recovery, then we focus more on rebuilding the sense of self-worth, their identity, and creating new patterns in their relationships and more long-term healing. So, yeah, I don't know if this answered your question. I went on a long rant about this.
So much of what you said, I want to comment on. There's just so much good stuff there. I've talked in a few podcasts, well, like several already, about the trauma bond. So I'm going to kind of skip over that right now, although 100% I was definitely trauma bonded, and it is I had someone come on that said that like it actually, they can see that it's like an addiction. It's very powerful, like a substance addiction. But you said that something I think is really interesting is these narcissistic people are often very high functioning.
Yes.
And so the outside world sees this high functioning person. And that, in my opinion, adds to the cognitive dissonance because you're saying a story that no one else sees, really. Have you seen that as sort of another obstacle that the survivor has to overcome, is how they're oftentimes perceived as being the problem and not the actual narcissist?
Because narcissists are on the outside very high functioning, right? They are professionals, they're successful, they have money, they are handsome, they're great friends, they're very charming and social, so they're very loved. For example, one of my clients was trying to kind of come to terms with this cognitive dissonance of, wow, but I see all this very abusive behaviors, but what I hear from my mom, you know, your sense of worth is who you marry, and this person looks like a great candidate. He has an amazing job, he has money, he, you know, you travel with him wherever you go. Like, what's wrong with you? Why are you having questions about that relationship? It doesn't look like this stereotypical definition of abuse, which is why I'm so glad you created this platform, because we're talking about narcissistic abuse, but it's just a kind of abuse. It has the same characteristics and foundations of other kinds of abuse.
It does, yeah.
That definitely contributes a lot to the cognitive dissonance and the self-doubt, you know, like everybody around me is saying, but he's such a good friend and he's so handsome. And
yes,
abusers can be all of those things and still abuse. So
exactly. It's not this or this. It can be this and this is also true as well about this person.
Exactly.
Whenever someone is actually in this stage and they come to you for treatment, do you do talk therapy, or what is the typical treatment for someone in that stage?
I would recommend coming once a week, and the standard of care would be weekly therapy sessions, and it varies. It depends on the person, how long it will take to start feeling better, or maybe if the symptoms are reduced and the client is able to regulate their affect, they're no longer in danger, you know, safety is there, they're able to set boundaries, and we can talk about scaling it back to every other week. In later stages, I will recommend exactly the same, but the approach and what we talk about in therapy is what would be different. Because even though we're in the early stages focusing on safety, setting boundaries, and breaking the trauma bond, and that it's hard, it requires a lot of attention. It is also very hard rebuilding your identity when you're further along in recovery. So who are you outside of the abuse? Start exploring what you love, what excites you, what feels like you. That also requires a weekly check-in and weekly work, especially in terms of safety, preventing you from starting another relationship with similar patterns.
Yeah. Yes. No, that's so true. You don't want to find the same sort of person just in a different suit later on. And if you don't deal with that, you have a high chance of doing that. Before we move on to sort of that phase of the healing process, do you find, like for me, I pretty much had to, for lack of a better word, abandon, cut off anybody that was still close with my ex. So I kept a couple friends that I had. I got new friends as well. I've had some really long-term, lifelong friends in my support system, my family. But other than that, I had to sort of cut off anybody that was in regular contact with him just to sort of protect myself. Is that something you see and or recommend?
Yes, definitely. Because one of the main strategies is to block and remove triggers.
Yeah.
And this applies for all kinds of abuse, and this is no exception. So if and that involves, blocking friends, old friends on social media, because if staying in touch with them is a trigger, and you are at risk of hearing about this person. So, yes, an essential recommendation is to block and remove triggers. Less exposure helps you heal faster, for sure.
So I don't know if this was good or bad, but just sort of what I did. And then I'd love to hear your comments on it. I did that at first for like the first year. And then after that, I live in a small town. I was like, you know what? Why should I sit in my, I think this has to do with some of the shame, being removed, is why should I sit in my house wondering about if he's at Walmart or not, or wondering if he's at this, restaurant or not. I'm going to the restaurant, and if he's there, I don't care.
Good for you. Yes. Yeah. And as a therapist, it's amazing to witness that happen in that moment when clients are able, after a long period of time, and long is subjective. It could be, 6 months, it could be 6 years, I don't know. But for you, in your case, it's a whole year of trying to hide. You were in fight or flight mode. You were hyper vigilant. And then one day you wake up and there's a shift. And that shift happens in your brain. So when we were talking about the images of the brain and how it changes with abuse, it is real. So therapy helps you rewire your brain, like literally, physiologically speaking, that one day you're like, yeah, I think that's it. I think I can go outside.
Yes.
It piles up. So your neurons are actively working in therapy. And one day it just takes one last fire between two neurons to create that change and shift to a new level of development. And that's what you're describing. So you went from crawling to walking one day.
Yes, one day it was just like, you know what? F this. I'm going out there. Like, why should I hide? Why should I be out? What are they going to do to me? Like, what are you going to do to me? And then, like, if every once in a while I will run into him, or I will run into one of his enablers, or what I call flying monkeys, and I notice, like, they look uncomfortable. They look like good. I mean, kind of, like, I know that sounds mean, but a part of me was like, good, I'm not going to feel ashamed. I'm not going to feel uncomfortable. You can leave.
Yeah.
So eventually, and if you're in therapy long enough, there's a good chance that you do go from crawling to walking, and it's like that, and it feels really good whenever you do.
100%. And one day you integrate the interventions enough, and your brain is ready enough to then create new neurological pathways that transform into this, translate into what you're describing, this behavior of, yeah, why do I have to be hiding? And that is a symptom, what you're describing, of self-trust. Mm-hmm. You even said, yeah, why do I have to feel ashamed? I don't feel ashamed. They should be ashamed. Shame and trust, they are like oil and water. So the more trust in yourself, the less space shame has to grow. So that is a beautiful example. I'm glad you shared that.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I agree with that. And really a lot of how he would verbally or emotionally abuse me was to make me, well, at the end of the relationship, I did not trust myself. I always said that was maybe the worst part of it, is not only did I not trust other people, but I didn't trust my own self. And that was the hardest part of it. But then the second thing is he would feed me, and it became sort of my inner voice, things like, you're odd, you're weird, no one likes to be around you. He would use the word autistic in a pejorative way to say, that was what I was. And all kind of other hurtful things that I started to internalize and be like, is this true? Is this really true about myself? And what I found is not only is that not true, but then whenever I got around people that were very supportive and kind and nice and actually had my back, they actually enjoyed being around me and I enjoyed being around them. And I felt supported and I could be my authentic little weird self, and not in a bad way, but in a good way of like, this is who I am.
Yeah, and what we're defining there, what you're describing, it's called evaluation. That's a
Okay.
That's a phase of narcissistic abuse. You know, it starts with the love bombing. You're amazing. You're the shiny object. You're so good. You're beautiful. I want to take you you're so special. And once you're in, the devaluation starts. Oh, but you're so odd, and you're so weird, and you're so ugly, and then it's combined with, but I love you so much, but I need you, but you're so special, and that creates the trauma bond and the codependency. So it also affects the self-trust. Yeah, I must be so ugly. I must be so stupid. Narcissists also isolate you from others. So it's hard. It makes it harder to trust others, to trust you, to trust reality in general. So it's whatever they say becomes real, because now it's a matter of controlling your environment and your safety. So are they, and that's where the hypervigilant also shows up.
Yeah.
Are they going to be loving and caring today, or are they going to be devaluating me and putting me down? Do I have to protect myself from them, or do I not have to? Like, which one I'm getting? The Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, or vice versa that you define? Yes, exactly.
I've talked about this quite a bit too, but he did isolate me. Basically, toward the end of our relationship, his friends were over our house constantly, and my friends, my family, no one really was in our lives anymore. It was just his friends, and he basically used them to further harm me once the relationship ended. And it was very isolating, and it's sort of like textbook, now that I understand it, textbook sort of how they function and what they do. So yeah, so I'm very glad that they're no longer in my life, and I'm very glad that good people are in my life. It makes a world of difference for sure.
Whoa.
So you mentioned that part of it is healing so that you don't end up with the same jerk, just in a different suit, basically. Does any of that come down to sort of your attachment style? Because I know, speaking personally, I did not have an abusive childhood. Everybody has some forms of trauma, but I do find that I do have an anxious attachment style that I'm very, very much working on to make it more of a secure attachment style. But do you see where people have to maybe heal their attachment style and those kind of core wounds before they can move on to the next relationship?
Definitely. They go hand in hand, right? You are more at risk. So I want us to frame this in the context of risk. Because having anxious attachment style will definitely put you at a higher risk of being trapped. I'm going to use that word in an abusive relationship with a narcissist. So yes, if anything that puts you more at risk of going back or finding yourself back in a narcissistic relationship or a relationship with a narcissistic abuser, then yes, it would definitely help. Okay. Having anxious attachment style, and full disclosure, because I don't want to put you on the spot here, you're sharing something so vulnerable. I also struggled with that, right? And in my therapy, that's something that I worked for years trying to heal. Even in functioning families, you can develop anxious attachment style. So it's this anxiety that comes up with the thought of anticipating separation and abandonment in your relationship. So if you do experience that as an adult in your relationships and you have identified that, yes, that's something that it's part of the healing process. If you want to be in a relationship, period, long-term relationship that feels safe, that is a necessary, essential part of the work. And that being said, it's an essential part of protecting yourself from falling back into this trap of the narcissistic abuse. And also, just to be in relationships, it's just so hard. Put aside the abuse part, healing from anxious attachment style or avoidant attachment style or disorganized attachment style, any of the attachment styles would be a main goal in therapy for sure.
No, I can see that. And you're right. Whenever I say I had a good childhood or there was no abuse, I'm talking about on like the very grand scheme of things, there wasn't. But was it perfect? No. I mean, I was born to parents where my mom was 17 when she got pregnant with me. My dad was like 20. I was born into a very low socioeconomic household, a very poor household. My parents' prefrontal cortex weren't even developed whenever they had me, so.
Good point. Exactly. That's a good point.
I think they did amazing for what they had at the time. They've been married now. I'm 43, so 44 years. They're amazing people, but it just that there's so much in your childhood that even when people are doing the best that they can as parents, not everything is perfect. And it oftentimes, I think, does have long-lasting impacts on you in ways that you might not even realize at first or ever. You may never realize it.
Right.
So you mentioned something else that I found so interesting because it kind of applies to my own story as well. You said that at the beginning of therapy, you're trying to break those trauma bonds. You're trying to get people out of those trauma bonds. And one of the most hurtful things that happened to me is someone that I thought was sort of a mentor, someone I thought that was sort of almost like a mother figure to me, ended up being very cold and very cruel. And she wrote to my best friend. She wrote in text, so I still have the text. When my best friend was telling her, you need to be kinder to Echo, you need to be nicer. And she wrote to her, how many times did Echo go back with, insert my ex's name, because I've lost count, as if me going back, within the context of the text, it was with me going back, I deserved what I got.
Wow, that's intense.
Yes.
And how do you feel? What did you do?
I felt horrible. So in modern times in the United States, which we are pretty egalitarian, we're working toward egalitarian. We're not in a Sharia law country or something like that. That anyone, and specifically this person claims to be a feminist and a liberal, would make that sort of a comment about a woman. They had it coming to them. And she even said to me once, well, what role did you play in this? So I'm assuming I'm not the only one that hears these sort of comments. So what are women hearing all the time that makes them feel this shame and guilt and makes it harder to get out of these relationships? In addition to, you have this actual trauma bond going on.
First of all, I'm so sorry that happened to you. That is unacceptable. Very much unacceptable and sadly very common, because another classic trait or consequence or characteristic of abuse is victim blaming.
Yes.
That is a dynamic that happens across all kinds of abuse. And it's blaming the victim for it. And it's unfortunately very common. It's like part of the whole system of abuse comes with it, and definitely comes from ignorance. This is so new, this term of trauma bond, that again, older generations have no idea what it is, like putting words into a dynamic that has been happening, since we're humans, probably since we started living humanity. So we are trying to fit information into categories so they make sense to us. So victim blaming has a lot to do with that. So it is malfunctioning version of that natural kind of adaptive human skill. Absolutely. Not to mention the emotional immaturity that comes along with the victim blaming. There's a lack of ability to acknowledge even be curious about it. It's also uncomfortable to talk about abuse in general. So victim blaming, it's almost like a defense mechanism, like an escape from it.
No, I agree. And victim blaming is huge. And what shocked me most about my situation is my social circle, while we do live in a rural part of the state of the country, my social circle is comprised mostly of liberals who claim to be feminists.
Right.
And the amount of victim blaming I heard within this circle made me think in more conservative circles, in more different types of demographic circles, what might these women face? Because in this circle where they should know, they should be educated about things like victim blaming, feminism, abuse cycles and dynamics and things like that.
Right.
I heard so much victim blaming. I heard, because my relationship did, just for context, it was physically abusive as well as emotionally, verbally, and every other way abusive. But I heard things that are absolutely untrue. I heard the classic things. I was cheating on him. I heard that bandied about. Never happened. I was insane. I was crazy. That sort of thing I've heard. I've heard things like, well, she went back to him, so it couldn't have been that bad.
Oh, wow. That was so horrible.
But when I talk to other survivors of abuse, particularly women, they have the same stories. So I don't think it's unique to my situation. I think these are just common things that society does to women specifically to victim blame them.
And, you are bringing this writer that I love in my mind right now, Glenn Doyle. She talks about how even in liberal worlds, like the one you're describing, we've been all breathing the toxic air of social oppression and discrimination. So there is internalized oppression in all of us, in all kinds of social oppression. And abuse is about power and power abuse. So it makes sense this happens in this context as well, but it is definitely not okay. But because we've been all breathing the toxic air together, even if we read the very progressive news and we are very liberal and we vote a certain way, it's just how society is structured.
Absolutely.
It's the toxic air we've been breathing. So the victim, and if you have less power, then you're going to be oppressed, or you're going to be the one we blame. So in this case, if we're talking about a heterosexual relationship, yes, the women will be the ones to blame. But even in dynamics like childhood abuse or childhood sexual abuse, is like you were asking for it, you were misbehaving, you didn't do your homework, you're being a bad kid, I don't know, whatever it is, not to hold the abuser accountable, but ultimately to escape from actually talking about abuse itself because it's so uncomfortable. So rather than a healthier way of approaching that would be, you know what, I am uncomfortable about talking about this. I have to think about this, and I don't know if I can engage in this conversation with you. But instead, we go for you asked for it, so let's not talk about it.
Or you'll hear things like, well, there's two sides to every story.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say about that is this: if this was a woman who was telling you this, probably she also experienced abuse, some sort of other,
she did,
right, social or oppression, gender oppression. So if you're talking about abuse to another person who does not want to talk about or deal with their own history of abuse, then they will react like that. So
that's so spot on, because she always will say that she is a victim of abuse as well. And she even said to people in the community, and to include me, but to our mutual friends, I never got justice, and I don't know why Echo wants it either. So you hit it spot on that she was, wow, that's insightful to say. So someone that is a victim of abuse oftentimes doesn't want to deal with it, and so they sort of victim blame the next person.
100%. And there might be even jealousy. You were able to get out of it and you actually maybe got justice. And look at her. She can now go out in town and go to the supermarket and the restaurants you were talking about. And I wasn't able to do that. Or I am still living with my abuser. So that is also common.
That's so insightful, because whenever I said, I think I'm going to start talking about this a little bit more, be more open about it, she said, this is my warning to you, don't do it. And then she turned around and was one of the main people that hurt me and kind of did to me what was done to her. So this all makes sense now talking to you.
I hear you.
So we're rounding up on the hour. Are you taking new clients? And if so, how would someone get in contact with you?
Yes, we are taking new clients. We are a team of now 6 therapists. We're all women. We are all kind of the same vibe that you hear from me today, the same approach. It's empowering young women and young couples to really break free from a lot of stereotypes, abuse. The best way to reach me would be through my website, psychotherapyforyoungwomen.com. You can read more about us and you can book a free consultation to see if we're a good fit for you. If you have any questions, we love hearing from your clients. There's also a contact form in the website if you just have questions before you actually talk on the phone with someone. And we also offer low-fee options for those who cannot afford therapy. We strongly believe in keeping therapy accessible for everyone.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing, because it is an obstacle for a lot of people to get into therapy. Now, I know that you are in Barcelona, but your practice is in New York. Are those the only 2 places you can see patients, or can you see people elsewhere?
The clients would have to be living in New York State so they can work with us. If not, I still encourage you to reach out and maybe we can direct you to resources, share resources with you.
And the website to Claudia's practice will be in the comments as well. Claudia, thank you so much for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I had so much fun, and thank you for creating this space for survivors of narcissistic abuse. This is amazing. Thank you for doing this.